At the family reunion, my chair was missing. Not just any chair, but the one at the main table where I'd sat for the past 15 years, right next to my late husband Harold's spot that we still kept empty out of respect. My daughter-in-law Jennifer stood there, arranging the place cards with deliberate precision, her manicured nails tapping against each one. When I asked about my seat, she didn't even look up. She just smiled that cold smile I'd been seeing more often lately and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "She can stand, she's not important. The people who actually contribute to this family need the seats." The words hit me like ice water. 45 family members were already gathering, and I saw heads turn. My own son, Michael, was adjusting the projector nearby, and he didn't say a word. Not one word in my defense. I stood quietly in the corner, my 72-year-old knees aching from the arthritis that had been getting worse, holding onto my purse with hands that had once saved lives in the emergency room. But when Jennifer started the slideshow she'd prepared about family updates, the first picture on the screen wasn't of them or their recent vacation or their renovated kitchen. It was of me, holding something in my hands that would change everything. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Thompson, and for 72 years, I've been many things to many people. A devoted wife to Harold for 38 years until pancreatic cancer took him. A mother to 3 boys who I raised mostly alone while Harold worked overseas construction to make ends meet. A nurse who worked double shifts in the emergency room at Jefferson Memorial Hospital, watching death and miracles walk hand in hand through those sliding doors. But more than any title, I was the foundation that everyone seemed to forget was holding up the house. When Harold died 5 years ago, I thought I'd fall apart. We'd been together since high school, 2 kids from the wrong side of Boston who built something beautiful together. But I didn't have time to crumble. Michael's marriage was struggling, and Jennifer needed someone to watch their 3 kids. David was going through his divorce, needing a place to stay for 6 months that turned into a year. Robert, my youngest, was starting his business and needed a loan that I gave without question, emptying half my savings. Every Sunday for the past 5 years, my small apartment has smelled like cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee by 7 a.m. The grandchildren would tumble through my door, knowing Grandma Margaret had their favorite breakfast ready. Jessica liked extra frosting. Little Tommy wanted his cut into soldiers. Sarah, the teenager, pretended she was too old for Grandma's treats, but always took 2. I never missed a recital, a baseball game, or a school play. When Jennifer had her gallbladder surgery, I moved in for 3 weeks to manage their household. When Michael's company downsized, I quietly paid their mortgage for 4 months from Harold's life insurance money. The neighbors called me the neighborhood grandmother. Mrs. Chen next door got homemade soup every time she was sick. The young couple across the hall never worried about babysitting because I was always available. The church fundraisers succeeded because I spent weeks organizing them. My refrigerator was covered in thank you cards, children's drawings, and photos of families I'd helped along the way. That's who I was. That's who I'd always been. But standing in that corner, being told I wasn't important enough for a chair, I realized something. Sometimes the people you sacrifice everything for are the first ones to forget your worth. My days had a rhythm that brought me peace, a carefully crafted routine that filled the empty spaces Harold left behind. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, I'd slip on Harold's old flannel robe, the green one that still smelled faintly of his Old Spice cologne, and pad barefoot to the kitchen. The coffee maker, the same one we'd received as a wedding gift 47 years ago, would gurgle to life while I stood at the window watching the sun paint the sky pink over Boston Harbor. The first hour belonged to Harold's roses. He'd planted them our first year in this apartment, back when the building manager said it was impossible to grow anything in the small concrete courtyard. Harold proved them wrong, creating a garden that now bloomed with 12 varieties of roses. The Mr. Lincoln reds, the peace roses with their yellow and pink edges, the pure white John F. Kennedys. I'd water them while talking to Harold, telling him about the grandkids, about Michael's promotion, about the new family at church who just moved from Puerto Rico. Sometimes I swear I could feel him there, especially when the morning breeze would stir the petals just so. By 7:30, my kitchen would transform into a small bakery. Tuesdays were for banana bread. I'd buy the marked-down, overripe bananas specifically for this. Thursdays meant chocolate chip cookies, always with extra chips because that's how Sarah liked them. Sundays, of course, were cinnamon roll days. The kind made from scratch with my mother's recipe, the dough rising overnight, rolled with butter and cinnamon sugar that would caramelize into sticky perfection. The smell would drift through the building's hallways, and often I'd make extra for Mrs. Chen or the young couple in 3B who were saving for their first house. 3 days a week, I volunteered at Jefferson Memorial, the hospital where I'd worked for 35 years. They didn't need me in the emergency room anymore, but I'd sit with patients who had no visitors, reading to them or just holding their hands. The head nurse, Patricia, who'd been a young trainee under me decades ago, would always say, "Margaret, you don't have to come so often." But she didn't understand. I needed them as much as they needed me. The feeling of being useful, of mattering, was like oxygen to me. Wednesday afternoons were for grocery shopping at Sullivan's Market, where I'd worked my first job at 16. Old Mr. Sullivan's son ran it now, but he still gave me the employee discount. I'd plan meals for the week, always buying extra in case one of the boys stopped by hungry. My freezer stayed stocked with Michael's favorite pot roast, David's beloved lasagna, and Robert's must-have chicken and dumplings, each labeled and dated in my careful handwriting. Evenings were my quiet time. I'd settle into Harold's leather chair with my crossword puzzle and a cup of chamomile tea. The 6 o'clock news would play softly while I worked through the clues, occasionally looking up at our wedding photo on the mantel. At 7 p.m. sharp, I'd call one of the boys, rotating through them so everyone got equal attention. These calls had become shorter lately, often going to voicemail, but I kept the routine anyway. Before bed, I'd write in my journal, the leather-bound one Harold gave me for our last anniversary. Small observations about the day. Cardinal at the feeder this morning. The red one Harold loved. Mrs. Chen's grandson got into MIT. Jennifer seemed tired when she picked up the kids, made extra soup for the freezer. Simple entries that marked the passage of ordinary days. This was my life. Quiet, purposeful, built on the foundation of family and community. A life that seemed solid and secure, where being needed was as certain as sunrise. I had no idea that the ground beneath me had already started to shift. It started 2 months before the reunion, subtle as a shadow creeping across the wall. Michael had always called me every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m., like clockwork. We'd talk about everything. His work at the architectural firm, the kids' progress in school, Jennifer's new yoga certification she was pursuing. But that February, the calls started coming late. Then they stopped coming altogether unless I initiated them. "Sorry, Mom, crazy day at the office," he'd say, his voice distracted, keyboard clicking in the background. "Can I call you back?" But he never did. When I mentioned it the following week, he acted like he'd completely forgotten. Michael, who used to tell me every detail about his presentations, now gave one-word answers. The son who once said I was his best advisor suddenly had nothing to share. Jennifer's transformation was more obvious. She'd always been somewhat cool. That was just her nature, and I'd accepted it. But now there was something sharp in her tone, like broken glass hidden in silk. When I offered to take the kids shopping for spring clothes, something I'd done every year since they were babies, she responded with an unusual bite. "That won't be necessary, Margaret. We're perfectly capable of buying our own children clothes." The way she said my name, not Mom like she'd called me for, 15 years sent a chill through me. The Sunday dinners began to change too. I'd arrive at their house with my homemade apple pie, Michael's favorite since he was 7, and Jennifer would barely acknowledge it. "Oh, another pie," she'd say, sliding it onto the counter behind store-bought cookies. "The kids prefer the ones from the bakery anyway." But I'd watch little Tommy's face fall. knowing that wasn't true. He'd sneak into the kitchen later for a slice, whispering, "Yours is better, Grandma." One afternoon in early March, I surprised them with a visit, bringing fresh bread and soup because Jennifer had mentioned having a cold. As I climbed their porch steps, I heard them through the open window. My name drifted out, and I froze. Your mother this, and your mother that. But the tone made me sound like a problem to be solved. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard constantly underfoot and always around clear as day. When I knocked, there was sudden silence, then shuffling, then Jennifer opened the door with that false smile. "Margaret, we weren't expecting you." She took the soup with fingertips like it might contaminate her. Behind her, Michael sat at the dining table with papers spread everywhere, quickly gathering them into a folder. His laptop screen shut with a snap. They exchanged a look, the kind married couples perfect over years, full of meaning I couldn't decipher. The grandchildren were acting different too. Sarah, my teenage granddaughter who usually told me everything about her high school drama, became evasive. "Mom says I shouldn't bother you with my problems," she said one day, not meeting my eyes. When I pressed, asking since when was she ever a bother, she just shrugged and changed the subject. Even their dog, Maxwell, who usually greeted me with enthusiastic jumps, was now kept in the backyard during my visits. The most unsettling incident happened at the grocery store. I ran into Jennifer's sister, Patricia, who'd always been friendly. She looked at me with something like pity and started to say, "I heard about your situation," before Jennifer appeared from nowhere, grabbing Patricia's arm. "We need to go," she said sharply, practically dragging her sister away. Patricia looked back at me, confused, while Jennifer whispered furiously in her ear. That night, I stood in my kitchen, Harold's photo in my hands. "Something's wrong," I told him. "I can feel it in my bones." But even then, I couldn't imagine what was coming. I became an expert at explaining away the warning signs, like a doctor ignoring her own symptoms. Each night, I'd sit in Harold's chair and construct elaborate reasons for their behavior, building castles of justification that crumbled by morning but were rebuilt by nightfall. The human heart has an incredible capacity to protect itself from truths too painful to accept, and mine was working overtime. Michael's always been stressed during the first quarter, I told myself, marking the calendar where his calls should have been. The Ferguson project he mentioned at Christmas must be demanding everything from him. I remembered when he was studying for his architecture license, how he'd disappear into his work for weeks. This was just like that. By April, things would be back to normal. They always were. I wrote in my journal, trying to convince myself with my own words. Jennifer is managing 3 children, a household, and her new certification program. Of course she's snippy. Remember when you were her age, Margaret? Raising 3 boys while Harold worked overseas? You weren't always sunshine either. I underlined this twice, as if the emphasis could make it more true. When Mrs. Chen asked why she hadn't seen the grandchildren visiting lately, I had an answer ready. "Oh, you know how it is with spring activities. Tommy has Little League. Jessica's in the school play and Sarah's preparing for her SATs. Mrs. Chen nodded, but her eyes held questions I didn't want to answer. The truth was, I hadn't seen them in 3 weeks, the longest stretch since Harold's funeral. I started making excuses for them before they could disappoint me. When Michael's birthday came and went without an invitation to his dinner, I called David. "Your brother must have forgotten to tell me about his birthday plans. You know how he is with dates." David paused too long before saying, "Yeah, Mom, must have slipped his mind." Later, I saw photos on Facebook, a restaurant celebration, the whole family raising glasses, my absence as obvious as Harold's empty chair. The rationalization became a full-time job. Jennifer's eye rolls were just fatigue. Michael's inability to meet my gaze was concentration on work problems. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered were probably about a surprise for my upcoming birthday. Yes, that had to be it. They were planning something special, and the distance was just to keep the secret. I even circled my birthday on the calendar with a hopeful heart. I increased my efforts to bridge whatever invisible gap had formed. I baked more, called less to avoid seeming needy, and always had my biggest smile ready. When Jennifer mentioned their kitchen renovation plans, I immediately offered to help. "That's not necessary," she said curtly, but I pretended not to hear the dismissal in her voice. "Nonsense. Family helps family. I have some savings set aside." At night, the doubt would creep in like fog under the door, but I'd push it back with memories. Michael's hand in mine on his first day of school, the Mother's Day card where he wrote, "You're my hero" in crayon, his wedding speech where he cried thanking me for showing him what love looked like. That Michael couldn't have vanished. He was just buried under stress, waiting to resurface. I even went to Dr. Paulson for a checkup, wondering if perhaps I was imagining things. "Maybe it's me," I told her. "Maybe I'm becoming one of those difficult elderly mothers, without realizing it." She ran tests, proclaimed me sharp as ever, and asked if everything was all right at home. "Perfect," I lied, the word bitter on my tongue. The denial was exhausting, like holding your breath underwater, knowing eventually you'll have to surface and face the truth. But for those 2 months, I chose the comfortable darkness of closed eyes over the harsh light of reality. The truth has a way of finding you when you're least prepared for it. It was a Thursday afternoon in late March, unseasonably warm, and Jennifer had called asking if I could watch the children while she ran errands. The request surprised me. She hadn't asked for my help in weeks, but I jumped at the chance, arriving with freshly baked snickerdoodles and enough hope to fill the harbor. The house was unusually quiet. Tommy and Jessica were at school and Sarah had track practice. "I'll just be 2 hours," Jennifer said, barely looking at me as she grabbed her purse. "My laptop's on the kitchen table if the school calls about early dismissal. The password is on the sticky note." She was gone before I could respond, leaving me in the familiar yet suddenly foreign space of their home. I spent the first hour cleaning, wiping counters that were already spotless, organizing toys that didn't need organizing. It was busy work, the kind that keeps your hands moving when your mind won't settle. The house felt different without the children's energy, like a theater after the audience leaves. That's when I noticed Jennifer's laptop was still open, the screensaver casting blue light across the kitchen table. I only meant to check the time. Harold always said my curiosity would get me into trouble, but I was just reaching to see the clock in the corner of the screen when my hand brushed the mousepad. The screen blazed to life, and there it was, an email that would shatter every careful justification I'd built. The subject line alone made my heart skip. "Re-Mom's house assessment. Confidential." The sender was a real estate agent named Bradley Morrison from Morrison & Associates Realty. My hand trembled as I read, each word a small knife finding its mark. "Jennifer, as discussed, the property assessment for 47 Harborview Avenue, Unit 12B, is complete. Current market value, $450,000. This is higher than anticipated due to the recent development in the area and the renovations done by the previous owner. As you mentioned, once the current occupant relocates, the quick sale option could yield approximately $425,000, which would more than cover the kitchen renovation and the European trip you discussed. I've attached comparable sales and suggested listing strategies. Remember, timing is everything with the spring market approaching." I scrolled down, my chest tightening with each word. Jennifer's response was there, sent just 3 days ago. "Brad, this is perfect. We're working on convincing her that a retirement facility is the best option. Once we have her signature on, the power of attorney, we can move quickly. She's been showing signs of confusion lately. We've been documenting everything, which should help our case. The family reunion in May will be the perfect setting to make this official with witnesses present." Michael is finally on board after I showed him the numbers. The room spun. I gripped the table edge, my knuckles white as porcelain. There was more, a thread of emails dating back 2 months. Plans discussed like I was already gone. My home, where Harold carried me over the threshold as a bride, where I raised my boys, where I held Michael as he cried over his first heartbreak, reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. An attachment labeled Sunset Gardens Retirement Community showed a brochure for a state-run facility an hour away, the cheapest option available. Gray rooms, industrial furniture, the kind of place where people go to be forgotten. Jennifer had already filled out a preliminary application with my name. I heard a car in the driveway and quickly closed the laptop, my fingers fumbling with the mouse pad. Jennifer walked in, shopping bags in hand, that practiced smile on her face. "Everything okay, Margaret?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, the evidence of their betrayal burning behind my eyes like acid. The family meeting was called for the following Sunday, April 2nd, at 2 p.m. Michael's voice on the phone was carefully neutral, rehearsed. "Mom, we need to discuss your future. It's important that everyone's there." When I asked what about my future needed discussing, he simply said, "We'll talk Sunday," and hung up before I could press further. I arrived to find them assembled like a tribunal. Michael and Jennifer sat on the sofa, a manila folder thick with documents on the coffee table before them. David and Robert were in the armchairs, looking uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Even the grandchildren had been sent to Jennifer's mother's house. This was too serious for young ears, apparently. "Mom, please sit," Michael said, gesturing to the single chair they'd positioned facing them all, like I was on trial. The room felt cold despite the afternoon sun streaming through the windows I'd helped them choose 5 years ago. Jennifer opened the folder with the efficiency of a prosecutor. "Margaret, we're all here because we love you and want what's best for you." The words were syrup over poison. "You're 72 years old. You live alone. We've noticed concerning signs lately." "What signs?" My voice came out stronger than I felt. "Confusion," Jennifer continued smoothly. "Forgetting conversations, repeating stories, showing up unannounced." She pulled out a notebook. They'd been keeping a log. March 5th. Forgot she'd already called that morning. Called again. March 12th. Told the same story about Harold twice in one visit. March 18th. Came by without calling first. Seemed disoriented. Each entry was a normal thing, twisted into evidence of decline. Yes, I'd called twice on March 5th. The first call was cut short when Michael said he was busy. The story about Harold was one the grandchildren had asked to hear again. And March 18th? I'd brought soup for Jennifer's cold, the crime of being thoughtful. Michael finally looked at me, but his eyes were hard, unfamiliar. "Mom, we think it's time you moved somewhere safer, somewhere with help available." He pushed a brochure across the table. Sunset Gardens, the same one from the email. "It's a nice facility. They have activities, medical staff, people your age." "And my apartment?" I asked, though I already knew. "We'd handle the sale for you," Jennifer said quickly. "Put the money toward your care, of course. Whatever's left would go into a trust we'd manage, for your own protection." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, maybe it's not a bad idea. You're not getting younger." "Did she tell you I have dementia?" I interrupted, looking at David, then Robert. "Did she show you medical reports? Talk to my doctor?" "Mom's being defensive," Jennifer said to Michael as if I wasn't there. "It's another sign. Paranoia is common in... I am right here." I stood, my legs shaking, but my voice firm. "I worked 12-hour shifts in the ER when doctors said women couldn't handle it. I raised 3 boys alone while my husband worked overseas. I've paid my bills, maintained my home, and helped this family for decades. And now you want to lock me away and sell my home for your kitchen renovation?" The silence was deafening. Jennifer's face went white, then red. "How dare you? I saw the emails, Jennifer. The real estate agent, the European trip you're planning with my home's value." Michael stood, his face cycling through emotions, shock, anger, then something worse, determination. "You went through Jennifer's private emails? Mom, that's actually concerning behavior. It proves our point." They'd already rewritten the narrative. My discovery of their betrayal became evidence of my decline. I looked at my 3 sons, searching for the boys I'd raised, but found only strangers wearing their faces. The next 3 days unraveled like a sweater with a pulled thread. One tug, and everything came apart. After the confrontation at Michael's house, I couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m. Monday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in a favor from Marcy, who worked at my bank for 30 years and owed me for nursing her mother through her final days. "Margaret, I shouldn't be telling you this," Marcy whispered over coffee at a diner 2 towns over, glancing around nervously. "But someone's been trying to access your accounts. Multiple inquiries about balances, attempts to add authorized users. The requests came with documentation, a medical letter suggesting you were experiencing cognitive decline." She slid a paper across the table. The letterhead was fake, but the signature attempting to be Dr. Paulson's was Michael's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. The conspiracy ran deeper than a simple property grab. That afternoon, I visited Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor Jennifer had been chatting with frequently. After some gentle pressing, she revealed Jennifer had been laying groundwork for months. "She told me you'd been leaving the stove on, Margaret. Said she found you wandering the street in your nightgown last Tuesday. I thought it was strange since I saw you that morning, perfectly dressed, heading to volunteer." Jennifer had been building a case, person by person, lie by lie. Tuesday brought worse revelations. Robert called, his voice shaking. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Jennifer came to me 2 months ago with David. She had this whole presentation, charts about elderly decline, statistics about accidents and seniors living alone, articles about children who waited too long to intervene." He paused, choking on shame. "She made it sound like we'd be negligent if we didn't act. She said you were too proud to admit you needed help." "What else, Robert?" I knew there was more. "She had papers, Mom, legal documents. She said if we all agreed we could file for conservatorship, that it was the loving thing to do. She made it sound like you'd thank us later." His voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I signed something. I thought I was protecting you." David's confession came Wednesday evening. He appeared at my door, eyes red-rimmed, clutching a folder. "Mom, I'm an idiot. Jennifer convinced me you were hiding symptoms. She said she'd seen you talking to Dad's photo like he was really there. But everyone talks to photos of people they love, don't they?" He opened the folder, revealing his copy of the documents. "Look at this. They've already drafted the conservatorship petition. They were going to file it the Monday after the family reunion." The document was thorough, professional, devastating. It painted me as a danger to myself, unable to manage finances, showing signs of severe cognitive decline. There were sworn statements from Jennifer and Michael, spaces for David and Robert's signatures, and a psychological evaluation from a doctor I'd never met who'd apparently observed concerning behaviors. But the final piece came from an unexpected source. Sarah, my granddaughter, called from a friend's phone Thursday night. "Grandma, I heard Mom on the phone with someone from a development company. They want to buy your whole building, but your apartment is the only one with original ownership from before the conversion. Mom said once they have control of your unit, the developers will pay a finder's fee on top of the sale price. She mentioned something about $1 million deal if they can deliver your apartment vacant by summer." The truth was complete now. This wasn't about concern for my well-being or even simple greed. They'd turned me into a business transaction, my life reduced to a line item in their path to wealth. The family reunion wasn't going to be a celebration. It was designed to be my public execution. That Thursday night, after Sarah's call, something inside me finally shattered. I made it to my bedroom before the dam burst, collapsing onto the quilt I'd hand-stitched for my 40th anniversary. Each square a memory, now feeling like pieces of a life that had been an illusion. The sobs came from somewhere primal, sounds I didn't recognize as my own. I clutched Harold's pillow, still kept on his side of the bed after 5 years, and screamed into it until my throat burned. "You left me with strangers. Harold, You said they were good boys. You promised me they were good boys." The photo albums came out, scattered across the bed like evidence at a crime scene. Here was Michael at 6, missing his front teeth, holding the Father's Day card where he'd written, "I love you more than infinity," in crayon. My fingers traced his face, trying to find the moment that child became someone who could sign papers to lock me away. There was the picture from his college graduation, my tears of pride visible even in the faded photograph. I'd worked 3 jobs that year to cover his final tuition payment. Another album held David's childhood, the science fair where we'd stayed up until 4 a.m. perfecting his volcano, both of us covered in paper mache and paint, laughing until we cried. He'd won second place and said, "We did it, Mom." Not I. We. When did we become them versus me? Robert's baby book fell open to his first birthday. I'd been so tired that day. Harold overseas again, the older boys sick with flu. But I'd still made that train cake from scratch, each car filled with different candy. The photo showed me holding Robert, chocolate frosting in both our hair, exhausted but beaming. That baby grew up to sign conservatorship papers without reading them. I found myself on the floor holding the Mother's Day cards they'd made over the years. Construction paper and glitter. Poems copied from books but signed with love. "You're our superhero. The best mom in the universe. Thank you for everything." The words blurred through tears as I realized these were archaeological artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. The betrayal went beyond the money, beyond the apartment. It was the erasure of everything I'd been to them. Every sacrifice rewritten as obligation, every act of love dismissed as duty, every moment of their childhood I'd prioritized over my own needs, now counting for nothing. I was being edited out of my own life story, transformed from protagonist to problem. At 2 a.m., I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The face staring back was unrecognizable, eyes swollen, cheeks blotchy, looking every one of my 72 years. Is this what they saw? Not their mother, but an old woman in the way? I touched the gray hair I'd stopped coloring after Harold died, the wrinkles earned through decades of worry over them, the hands spotted with age but still steady, still capable. The cruelest part was the gaslighting, making me question my own mind. For hours, I tested myself. I recited my social security number, Harold's birthday, all 12 grandchildren's middle names. I balanced my checkbook in my head. I named every medication in the hospital's emergency cart from memory. My mind was sharp, clear, functioning perfectly. The only thing wrong with me was trust. I'd trusted the wrong people with my heart. By dawn, I was empty, sitting in Harold's chair as the sun painted the walls gold. The roses needed watering. Mrs. Chen would expect our morning chat. Life demanded I continue, even though everything had changed. I looked at our wedding photo, Harold's young face full of promise. "What do I do now?" I asked him. The silence that answered was deafening. Dawn was breaking on Friday morning when I finally stopped crying. I sat in Harold's chair, surrounded by scattered photos and wet tissues, watching the sunrise paint the harbor gold. My body ached from hours of sobbing, but as the light grew stronger, something else began to stir, something I hadn't felt since my days as an ER nurse facing impossible odds. I stood slowly, my knees protesting, and walked to Harold's portrait on the mantel. His eyes, captured forever at 35, seemed to bore into mine. I remembered that exact expression from when Tommy McCourt, the neighborhood bully, had pushed 8-year-old Michael off his bike, breaking his arm. Harold had calmly walked to the McCourt house, and whatever he said to Tommy's father ensured our boys were never bothered again. "Sometimes, Maggie," he'd told me that night, "you have to show people who they're really dealing with." "You're right, my love," I whispered to his photo. "I've been so busy being their victim that I forgot who I am." I walked to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. Really looked this time. Yes, there were wrinkles and gray hair and tired eyes. But there was also the woman who'd fought hospital administration for better patient care and won. The woman who delivered a baby in a stuck elevator during the 1978 blackout. The woman who'd raised 3 boys on her own while Harold worked overseas, never missing a parent-teacher conference or baseball game. That woman was still in there, and she was furious. The self-pity that had consumed me transformed into something harder, sharper. Determination mixed with righteous anger. They wanted to erase me, paint me as a confused old woman. They'd forgotten that I'd spent 35 years in the ER, dealing with con artists who came in seeking drugs, documenting everything, building airtight cases. They'd forgotten that their mother knew how to fight. I pulled out my laptop, the one Robert had given me last Christmas, and created a new document titled Evidence. My hands were steady now, typing with the same precision I'd once used to chart patient records. Every incident, every conversation, every lie Jennifer had told, I documented it all with dates and times. The training that had made me an excellent nurse, attention to detail, thorough documentation, pattern recognition, was about to serve a different purpose. By noon, I'd made a decision that Harold would have applauded. I wasn't going to beg my children to love me. I wasn't going to plead for basic respect. And I certainly wasn't going to let them ship me off to some facility while they sold my home and counted their profits. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. But it would be fought on my terms, with weapons they didn't know I possessed. I showered, dressed in my best Navy suit, the one I wore to Harold's funeral, the one that made me look like the professional I'd always been, and styled my hair properly for the first time in weeks. Looking in the mirror again, I saw her. Margaret Thompson, N. The woman who'd once stared down a drug dealer threatening her patient and didn't blink. She was back. I opened Harold's old filing cabinet, the one Michael had always laughed about, calling it Mom's Ancient System. Inside, organized perfectly, were 40 years of documents, including some my children never knew existed. Harold's military records, his life insurance policies, all of them. Investment accounts they'd never heard about because Harold had insisted we keep some things just between us. My fingers found the folder labeled Insurance Private, and I smiled for the first time in days. They think they know everything about our finances, I told Harold's photo. They think I'm just a foolish old woman with a paid-off apartment. They have no idea what their father really left us. My first call was to Patricia Nguyen, who'd started as a nervous student nurse under my supervision 20 years ago and was now one of Boston's most successful elder law attorneys. "Margaret," she exclaimed when she heard my voice, "I've been hoping you'd call. I heard through the hospital network that someone's been asking about your medical records." We met that afternoon in her downtown office, 30 floors up with a view of the entire harbor. I laid out everything: the emails, the fake medical letter, the conservatorship papers, the development deal. Patricia's expression grew darker with each document. "Margaret, this isn't just family dispute. This is conspiracy to commit elder fraud. This is criminal." "I don't want them in jail," I said firmly. "They're still my sons, however lost they've become, but I want them stopped, and I want protection." Patricia smiled, the same sharp grin she'd had when successfully advocating for patients. "Then we get creative. First, we need documentation of your mental competence. I'm scheduling you for a comprehensive evaluation with Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the best geriatric psychiatrist in the state. She'll test everything: cognitive function, decision-making capacity, financial competence. Her evaluation will be unimpeachable." Next came the technology. My grandson, Tommy, Jessica's twin, had always been the tech wizard, and crucially, he was too young to be part of Jennifer's scheme. "Grandma needs to learn about recording apps," I told him during his Saturday visit, which Jennifer still allowed because she needed the free babysitting. "For recording bird songs," I added with a wink. Within an hour, he had my phone set up with an app that could record with one touch, automatically backing up to the cloud. The recordings began immediately. Jennifer, comfortable in her deception, spoke freely. "Your mother's getting worse," I recorded her telling Michael. Yesterday, she seemed completely out of it. I was in the next room, sharp as ever, documenting her lies. Michael's response was equally damning. "Good. The more evidence we have, the easier the conservatorship filing." I visited my bank manager officially with Patricia present, documenting my perfect understanding of my finances. We discovered more. Jennifer had indeed been calling, pretending to be concerned about my confusion with banking. The manager, thankfully, had found it suspicious and noted everything. Those notes became part of my evidence file. The masterstroke came from Harold's papers. The life insurance policies I'd found totaled $2 million. Not the $500,000 Michael thought was everything. Harold had been careful, paranoid even, about keeping some things private. "Never let them know everything, Maggie," he'd said. "Not even the boys. Money changes people." There was also a trust Harold had set up through his military benefits, specifically protected from conservatorship proceedings. I created my own trust with Patricia's help, transferring the apartment into it with specific conditions. Even if they somehow gained conservatorship over me, they couldn't touch the apartment. It was designated for my grandchildren's education, with Patricia as trustee. The documents were filed quietly on a Thursday afternoon while Jennifer was at yoga. For the family reunion, I prepared a special presentation. Not just the evidence of their betrayal, but something more. I contacted the developer Jennifer had been negotiating with, presenting myself as the concerned owner. They were surprisingly forthcoming, sending me emails about their dealings with Jennifer, who'd been presenting herself as having power of attorney. Those emails went into my slideshow. The final piece was emotional leverage. I found the video from Michael's wedding, where he'd given a speech about how I'd taught him the meaning of unconditional love. I edited it carefully, planning to play it right before revealing what he'd become. Sometimes the mirror of who we used to be is the harshest judge of who we are. The morning of May 15th arrived with unusual heat for a Boston spring, the air thick with humidity that promised afternoon storms. I stood at my bedroom mirror at 6 a.m. carefully applying the lipstick I hadn't worn since Harold's funeral. My hands were perfectly steady. The navy dress I chose was deliberate, professional, dignified. The same one I'd worn when I received the Florence Nightingale Award for Excellence in Nursing. If they wanted to paint me as a feeble old woman, I'd make them work for it. The family reunion was Jennifer's production, held at the Riverside Country Club she'd insisted on despite the cost. 45 relatives would gather, some driving from as far as Pennsylvania. Jennifer had sent elegant invitations weeks ago, billing it as a celebration of family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I tucked the USB drive, containing my presentation, into my purse, alongside the remote control I'd tested a dozen times. Technology would be my unexpected ally. I arrived deliberately early at noon when only the staff were setting up. I introduced myself to Kevin, the young man handling the AV equipment, slipping him a $100 bill. "I have a surprise presentation for my family," I explained, handing him my USB. "When my daughter-in-law starts her slideshow, I need you to be ready to switch to mine instead. Can you do that?" Kevin, who probably made minimum wage dealing with demanding clients, pocketed the money with a grin. "Ma'am, just give me a signal." By 1 p.m., relatives began arriving. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Harold's brother from Florida, Jennifer's extended family with their perfectly styled hair and designer handbags. Jennifer had positioned herself as the hostess, greeting everyone effusively, playing the devoted daughter-in-law. She wore a new dress, red, expensive, probably purchased with the expectation of coming money. I watched her work the room, laying groundwork. "Margaret's been having such a hard time since Harold passed," she said to Aunt Dorothy, loud enough for others to hear. "We're just so worried about her living alone." The head tilts of sympathy, the knowing nods. She was good at this. Michael stood by her side, uncomfortable but complicit, shaking hands and avoiding my corner of the room. At 1:45, I looked for my chair at the main table. The place cards were arranged in perfect calligraphy. Jennifer's hobby. Michael, Jennifer, their children, David, Robert, Harold's brother James, Jennifer's parents. No card for me. The matriarch of the family, the one who'd organized these reunions for decades, had no seat at the table. "Oh, Margaret," Jennifer said with false surprise when I approached. "I must have miscounted. Don't worry, you can sit at the side table with Cousin Ruth." Ruth was 93 and deaf. The insult was calculated. Public, perfect for Jennifer's narrative. I was being demoted in front of everyone, marked as unimportant, lesser than. "She can stand," Jennifer added to her sister Patricia, that smile playing at her lips. "She's not important. The people who actually contribute to this family need the seats." The words carried across the room. I saw Cousin Maria's shocked face, Uncle James's frown, but no one intervened. This was Jennifer's show, and everyone seemed to understand that. I stood quietly in the corner, my hand in my purse, fingers touching the remote. Let her have this moment. Let her think she'd won. Around me, the family chatted and laughed, unaware they were about to witness an execution, just not the one Jennifer had planned. At 2 p.m. sharp, Michael clinked his glass. "If everyone could take their seats, we have some important family business to discuss." The room settled. 45 faces turning toward the main table. Jennifer opened her laptop, the projector humming to life. "Before we begin," Jennifer announced, "we need to address something important about the family's future." I pressed the button. The projector screen flickered, and Jennifer's prepared slideshow vanished. In its place, my face appeared. Not the elderly woman standing in the corner, but a photograph from 5 years ago, holding Harold's hand in his hospital bed during his final days. Next to me in the photo was a document crisp and clear. Harold's last will and testament showing an insurance payout of $2 million that Michael never knew existed. The room went silent. Jennifer frantically clicked her laptop. "Technical difficulties." She laughed nervously, but Kevin, my new ally at the AV table, shook his head. "It's working perfectly, ma'am." The next slide appeared, Jennifer's email to the real estate agent. I'd highlighted the key phrases in yellow. Once we convince her to sign, she's been showing signs of confusion. "The family reunion will be the perfect setting." Gasps rippled through the room. Aunt Dorothy dropped her wine glass. "What is this?" Michael stood, his face flushing red. "Mom, what are you doing?" I stepped forward from my corner, my voice carrying the authority of 35 years commanding emergency rooms. "What I'm doing, Michael, is showing this family who you really are. Please, everyone, keep watching." The presentation continued relentlessly. Screenshots of Jennifer searching how to declare parent incompetent on the family computer. The fake doctor's letter with Michael's forged signature attempting to access my bank accounts. Phone recordings began to play through the speakers, Jennifer's voice crystal clear. "The old bat has no idea what we're planning. She'll be in Sunset Gardens by June and we'll be in Europe by July." Cousin Maria stood up. "Jennifer, did you just call Margaret an old bat?" The next recording was worse. Michael this time. "Mom's lived her life. It's our turn now. That apartment is worth more than she'll ever need. Why should she sit on all that money while we struggle?" "Struggle?" Harold's brother James laughed bitterly. "You drive a Tesla, Michael. Your wife wears designer clothes. What struggle?" The slideshow revealed the development deal, emails between Jennifer and Pinnacle developers, discussing the $1 million potential of my apartment building. Jennifer had been negotiating as if she already had power of attorney, promising delivery by summer. The developer's response was particularly damning. "We appreciate your guarantee that the elderly tenant will be relocated promptly." "Elderly tenant?" I asked the room. "That's what I've become? Not your mother, not the woman who worked double shifts to put you through college without loans?" David and Robert sat frozen, horror dawning on their faces as they saw their signatures on the conservatorship papers displayed next. But then came their redemption, recordings of their recent confessions to me, their shame, their manipulation. By Jennifer. "We were lied to," David's recorded voice said. She made us think Mom was sick. The climax came with the psychiatric evaluation, not the fake one they'd prepared, but the real one from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, dated just last week. Mrs. Thompson demonstrates exceptional cognitive function, scoring in the 95th percentile for her age group. Her financial competence is unquestionable. Any suggestion of incapacity would be fraudulent. The final slide was my master stroke, the new trust documents. The apartment was already protected, designated for the grandchildren's education only, with Patricia Nguyen as trustee. Even if they'd succeeded in their conservatorship plan, they would have gotten nothing. I pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying. This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. Try to declare me incompetent now. I looked directly at Michael, then Jennifer. You wanted my money so badly? Congratulations. You've just ensured you'll never see a penny of it. The room exploded. Jennifer's parents were screaming at her. Michael sat down heavily, his face white. And there I stood, no longer in the corner, no longer dismissed as unimportant. I was the last one standing. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Jennifer stood frozen for a moment, her perfectly composed facade cracking like ice in spring. Then she grabbed her purse and ran, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. Michael called after her once weakly before slumping back in his chair. The Tesla they'd driven together would leave with only her in it. Mom, Michael started, but I raised my hand. Not now, Michael. Maybe not ever. You'll be hearing from my attorney about the attempted fraud and elder abuse. I won't press criminal charges. You're still my son, though you forgot how to be one. But there will be a restraining order against Jennifer, and you'll need to decide where you stand. The room erupted in conversation, but I wasn't done. Sarah, my granddaughter, pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around me, crying. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I knew something was wrong. I should have done more. You called me, I said, stroking her hair. You warned me. You're the only one who remembered that I'm a person, not a problem to be solved. David and Robert approached together, both with tears streaming down their faces. Mom, we're idiots, Robert said. Complete idiots. Can you ever forgive us? Forgiveness will take time, I told them honestly. Trust will take longer. But you can start by telling the truth. To everyone here, to the authorities if needed, about how you were manipulated. Over the following weeks, the family restructured itself around a new reality. Michael, forced to choose between his marriage and his family, initially chose Jennifer. But when she emptied their joint savings and disappeared to her sisters in California, leaving him with divorce papers and massive credit card debt she'd accumulated, he learned the price of betrayal from both sides. The restraining order against Jennifer was granted immediately. The evidence was overwhelming. The real estate developers, horrified at being entangled in potential elder fraud, severed all contact and threatened their own legal action against Jennifer for misrepresentation. The state-run facility that had reserved a room for me apologized profusely and launched an investigation into their admission procedures. My apartment became mine again in ways it hadn't been for months. I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and breathed freely in my own space. The trust for the grandchildren's education was ironclad. Each would receive funds for college, but only for education and only if they maintained a relationship with me. Jennifer's children chose their grandmother over their mother's poison, visiting me every week despite her furious phone calls from California. David and Robert became different sons. Attentive without being overbearing, helpful without expecting payment. They took turns driving me to volunteer work, not because they thought I couldn't manage, but because they wanted to spend time with me. Robert started bringing his daughters for Sunday baking lessons. David helped me digitize Harold's photos, listening to stories about their father he'd never heard before. The family reunions continued, but under new management, mine. The next year's gathering was smaller but warmer. Michael came alone, humbled, working to rebuild not just our relationship but his entire life. He'd started therapy, confronting the greed that had nearly cost him everything. I forgot who raised me, he said simply. I forgot what you taught me about what really matters. Patricia Nguyen helped me establish additional protections, medical directives, financial safeguards, and a board of trustees that included medical professionals who actually knew me. No one would ever again question my competence without facing an army of documentation and allies. My story spread through the senior community like wildfire. I became an unexpected advocate, helping other elderly people protect themselves from family financial abuse. The local news did a segment on elder fraud, and I sat there in my Navy suit, articulate and fierce, showing everyone that gray hair doesn't mean gray matter. 1 year later, I stood in Harold's rose garden at sunset, the golden light catching the dewdrops on petals that bloomed more magnificently than ever. The Mr. Lincoln Reds had spread along the entire south wall, their perfume filling the courtyard. Mrs. Chen sat beside me on the new bench my grandchildren had installed for Mother's Day, sipping tea from the china Harold brought back from overseas 40 years ago. "You look different, Margaret," she said, studying my face. "Stronger." I smiled, thinking of the journey from that horrible day when my chair went missing to now. I learned something, Mei Lin. When you spend your whole life giving, people sometimes forget you're a person, not just a resource. They start seeing your love as an endless well they can drain without consequence. The garden had become my sanctuary, but also my symbol. These roses survived harsh winters, disease, neglect when Harold first died. But with the right care, boundaries, and respect for their nature, they thrived. Just like me. Just like any parent who refuses to be erased from their own story. I pulled out my journal, the leather one Harold gave me, and read my latest entry aloud to Mrs. Chen. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about respect and genuine love. The moment we become burdens in the eyes of those we sacrificed everything for, we haven't lost our value, they've lost their way. Sarah appeared at the garden gate, backpack slung over her shoulder, coming straight from her college classes, paid for by the Education Trust. "Grandma, I got an A on my nursing school entrance exam." She decided to follow in my footsteps, but for the right reasons, to help, not to take. "That's my girl," I said, hugging her tight. Behind her came Tommy and Jessica, now teenagers, carrying groceries. They'd started a tradition of cooking dinner for me every Friday, not because I needed it, but because they wanted to learn the recipes I'd perfected over decades. Michael arrived last, still tentative even after a year of rebuilding. The divorce had finalized 6 months ago, Jennifer getting far less than she'd schemed for, most of it going to legal fees. He'd moved to a smaller apartment, sold the Tesla, and started volunteering at the hospital where I'd worked. "Mom," he said quietly, "the patient I was sitting with today, Mr. Rodriguez, he asked if I was Margaret Thompson's son. When I said yes, he said, 'Then you come from good stock. She saved my life in '92. "You always came from good stock, Michael," I replied. "You just forgot it for a while." As darkness fell and my family, my real family, the ones who'd proven their love through actions, not words, gathered in my small apartment, I thought about all the elderly parents sitting alone tonight, dismissed, forgotten, or worse, actively betrayed. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, 1 in 10 Americans over 60 experiences some form of elder abuse, and 90% of abusers are family members. Financial exploitation by family members results in $2.9 billion in losses annually. But statistics don't capture the emotional devastation of being betrayed by those you raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for. They don't measure the nights spent wondering where you went wrong, or the strength it takes to stand up and say, "No more." The roses bloom brighter now than they ever did when I was trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children isn't endless sacrifice. It's showing them that even mothers have limits, even grandmothers deserve respect, and even the elderly can fight back. What would you do if your own children tried to take everything from you? Have you witnessed elder abuse in your family or community? Share your thoughts below. And remember, our parents and grandparents built the foundations we stand on. They've earned their dignity through decades of sacrifice. Stand up for them, speak out when you see abuse, and never forget that one day we'll all be old enough to be vulnerable. The way we treat our elderly today is the way we're teaching our children to treat us tomorrow.